Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I am back with Dr. Scott Walter yet again. I know it's only been 24 hours basically, but in the meantime, Herbert and Brett Adcock and your video came out. I watched it while I was doing some other stuff today, and I was so on fire to talk about this that I actually preempted Randy Kirk. Sorry about that, Randy. You're gonna have to wait with Scott. Welcome back, Scott. What was it? Before I react, I just want to know what it was like actually talking to Brett. It seemed pretty cool.
Oh, it was great. It was great. Of course, we just wanted him to talk and not us talk, which we're usually pretty good at doing all the chatting because he was the one that had a lot of the information, and I think it was eye opening. The first half hour just with Herbert, I was taking notes furiously because suddenly he was kind of confirming a lot of things that we had been conjecturing about and didn't quite know that much about from the marketplace and knowing a bit more about the background of the BMW deal. So that was a big thing, and we'll get into the specifics of that. And then, of course, from the technical standpoint, it was rather interesting. And unfortunately, he couldn't go into too much depth on some things because there were some things that are kind of proprietary, but was, let's say, able to kind of confirm some things to get an idea of where the bot technology is and how it's really progressing along, maybe a lot more rapidly than a lot of us may be thinking as outside observers.
Yeah, I agree. It was pretty eye opening. And by the way, if people have not seen that video, I will of course leave a link to it in the description. And I think it was really cool, the balance between you and Herbert, because you were just like geeking out on very specific questions. And then Herbert was like, let's dial this back to like a more general audience. I, of course, was like, no, 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 let's keep doing the geeky questions, but I can totally understand that too.
And I'm
Yeah,
hoping there's like a follow up with the Brett because we had a pretty good rapport there,
yeah,
and I'm really hoping to get a chance to get a much closer look at it and go into some real deep dive detail on some of the mechanics, some of
yeah,
the decisions they've made, why things are, because there's some interesting design choices,
yeah,
and it'd be
yeah.
interesting to know what they're thinking of going forward. And I've got tons of ideas as well. I'd love to share.
Right. And I just actually watched the Aloha mobile Aloha video again yesterday as sort of a thing. And I was like, man, even for something that's, $30,000 and very inexpensive, relatively speaking, and crude hardware, it's able to do a lot. So you can see that it's all about the brain. And I think your comment about that, you were nodding, saying that the mechanics were going to be finalized long before the brain was finalized. You're like, oh, maybe not. That seems like things have taken a very significant shift recently. And so my first observation was that right at the end, Brett was talking about the sort of multidisciplinary approach. And Herbert asked him about, is embodied AI versus disembodied AI, or inside the computer AI, going to get to AGI first? And my opinion is very much embodied AI. And I'm like, you got to have a body to have a consciousness. And I think there may be a difference, because I need to again point this out, because everybody always uh, mixes up the two of these things. That I'm talking about artificially intelligent agents here, not AGI. AGI is just a very multidisciplinary hammer. So that's something where you still have to tell it what to do and all of that. And these bots at this point, that's what they are. I mean, you tell it to go make coffee, it doesn't decide it wants coffee. So the difference is going to be that I think it's going to have to be embodied, and maybe the virtual world will be good enough for this, but it needs to be embodied to be an agent. So I'm very strongly of that opinion. But anyway, but my thought specific to the interview was, I was like, oh, look how cool it is that he's talking about multidisciplinary. And I was like, well, the multidisciplinary could actually not just be text and video and images like they're talking about now at OpenAI, but the multidisciplinary is actually embodied plus unembodied AI. So it's learning from all of these disciplines. So it wouldn't be like your car, you're just bolting Grok onto the FSD, but the two things are combining and creating. They're more than a sum of their parts. There's synergy, which is the word that the business world has completely destroyed. But yeah,
Gestalt, basically. Yeah.
a gestalt. Yeah, exactly. Where you get a lot more than you think you're going to get out of that. And I think that was the surprise that Brett was expressing. As he noted, the Keurig example is not like, it's not like a masterpiece of chef cooking or something. It's like opening up a thing, putting a cup in. It wasn't about specifically what it was doing, but it was interesting for him to say that like this is way harder than factory work. Right. Just making a cup of coffee. He said that. He was like, this is
Right.
harder than the stuff we've picked. I'm not saying that there's not some factory work that's harder, but
Yeah,
uh,
he's talking about it being like the factory work being maybe more structured in
yeah.
many ways.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that he was kind of getting to it. It wasn't so much about the Keurig example itself, but how it was taught. That's the real
Exactly.
breakthrough.
Exactly.
Not that it could
Yes.
do that, and that
Right.
they had sort of discovered some way that maybe surprised even them on how easy it was, which means
Right.
it'll be easier. And when I tried pressing him on that, you notice
Yeah.
he didn't want to answer,
Right.
and because we've speculated,
Specifically
it's like,
about the cameras. It was about like,
right.
are you wearing goggles that are showing it, or are they fixed cameras around the room, or is it just a
Or
video on
is
somebody's
or was it the
iPhone?
bot itself? And
Oh,
this is the
yeah.
thing, because
Teleoperated.
those are my
Yeah.
3 things. Those are the different perspectives, is that
Right.
the bot has cameras, and is the bot
Yes.
observing, and then from that being able to figure it out. That's one way. The other, of course, is the human can put it on there.
Right.
But at some point, the bot, you have to do like a transformation of whatever the
Right.
viewpoint is of that into whatever the perspective of the bot is.
Right.
And somehow mounting a camera on a human would be a lot easier to get that kind of perspective versus
Right.
having the cameras to the side. But if you get a camera to the side or you have a bot to the side, it's basically the same problem, isn't it? It's just a slightly different transformation that has to be done there. And that's what I'm almost wondering, is if it literally is that they figured out how to make that transformation from one point of view to the other, and that the camera system is literally the bot observing someone else.
Right.
That
Yeah.
would be pretty big. And even if it was just doing something simple, if it was like, we did this demonstration, it's being able to see it. And unfortunately, we don't know the answer there. And I think there's good reason they don't want to give the answers, because they've probably come up with some sort of teaching breakthrough that they
Right.
think gives them a competitive edge right now.
And I just want to point this out right here, right now. This is the Mobile Aloha thing and the genius that they've got, because this robot does not look like a humanoid. It's
Hmm.
kind of like apparently it has rollers on the bottom that the operator can control, but it has a hole in the middle of it where the person can stand. And so they're directly manipulating objects. So you're cutting out that transformation step that you're talking about. Is if I watch you break an egg and put it into a fry pan, I have to do this mental gymnastics of transforming that from your space to my space, imagining myself do that. And here you're removing that with what this guy is doing here, because let me see if I can make the image larger here. You're actually inside the bot and you're manipulating the bot itself. So you've cut out a very, very complicated step. And we don't know because, of course, we were not told. And Brett, it's perfectly fine. He was actually very open, I thought, but there were spots where
Hmm.
he was like, can't tell you. Um,
Yeah.
but we don't know how it learned. The most impressive case would have been if the bot was standing in the side of the room and the person said, watch me make this cup of coffee. And it was able to do that entire transform on its own. I kind of doubt that that's how sophisticated it is at this point, but maybe it is. But then you've got the level of maybe you show it sort of POV shots, person puts on some cameras on their head, stereoscopic cameras, does it 50 times and it learns. And then the most sort of invasive way is sort of the way the Tesla bot did the folding of the shirt, which is teleoperated. And therefore it doesn't have to do any transformation because it's literally the same body. So it's like, okay, I can learn how to do this. So it seems like 3 levels right there, 3
Right, right.
layers.
But in that case, I think the teleoperator, because in the Aloha example, the teleoperator is standing behind the robot about
Yes,
wherever the camera system is that's set up for it. So they're
right,
able to have a direct line of view of what's going on. It makes it a lot easier for
right,
them to figure it out. For a teleoperator that's off to the side, they have a hard time understanding what the bot is doing because their perspective is so far off. So they are
right.
probably wearing vision goggles, which
Oh,
is
for
seeing
sure,
exactly
for
what
sure.
Optimus is. So they're
Yeah,
going on down there. They're seeing it from that kind of point of view. And again, you are then training it from the perspective of the bot, which makes it a lot easier for it to learn that. But if
right.
you are doing it from the side, that's a lot harder because you've got the
No,
wrong
that would
perspective.
be very I mean, that's just like me trying to point see, I did it wrong. Trying to point to like something over on this side like this,
Hmm.
right there. I mean, that's really complicated because it's backwards and I'm just looking at myself, so that's easy.
Hmm.
So yeah, trying to but even the folding of the shirt, like if you imagine yourself with VR glasses on and you could see he was wearing black gloves, so probably haptic gloves or something like that. But even with that, the picking it up and doing it without actually manipulating, there's no gravitational, you don't feel the weight of the
You don't
shirt.
feel
It would be
yeah.
complicated.
There's no
Yeah,
sensory feedback there. And
yeah,
so if you were like even to try to grab a ball telerobotically, your
right,
hands would come completely down through the virtual
right,
ball, whereas the reality it's there. And you're not getting that force feedback. You're getting some
yeah,
haptic feedback, which means your fingers might be buzzing or doing something like that to
right,
tell you you're
right,
kind of in contact. But it's a very different sensory perception than
yeah.
what the actual mechanism is doing.
Right. Oh, speaking of that, people watch this video that I'm putting up right here. I just released a CES like a couple of minutes before we got online here. It's a CES highlights, and one of the companies I talked to was Sense Glove, and it was really interesting. They have haptic gloves, but they have literal cables behind it with kind of a pack, and as you reach, it stops you, so you can't. And it
Okay.
could do like soft objects, so it's much better than just bzz, 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 like that. You're feeling it. It's like, it's like that's it.
It's more like Ready Player One then.
Yes, yes. And I thought it was pretty genius because it's kind of the opposite of what these humanoid robots are doing, which is putting cables on the insides to pull the fingers down. This was cables on the outside to hold it so you couldn't move it. And it was very effective. It's still very much beta product, but they had a demo where I put on VR glasses and I was able to pick up flasks and then a squishy object and squeeze it. And so you could feel all of that stuff. And I was like, okay, this is cool. So that's a
Mhm.
very cool technology. So there are things that would be able to do that, but it is complicated. I think one of the other things that was really interesting, of course, was the in-houseness of manufacturing. And this actually was one of the, I was like, before we started recording, I was like, I have a couple of like, this is one of the big ones. Somebody either is already or should be thinking about this very soon, and that is creating sort of like TSMC. Somebody should be creating a humanoid bot actuator foundry. That you know how TSMC makes everybody's silicon chips and everything. That would be such a good idea because that's going to commoditize the price, right? It once like I figure I can't say whether figure robotics actuators are the same as Tesla because clearly they're using more rotational. Geez, what am I looking for? Not linear, but
Yeah,
um,
rotational. Yep.
yeah,
Mhm.
rotation. Anyway, rotational actuators not linear, so they're not using the same ones. But you could imagine after a couple of years that there will be a standardization and a commoditization of these actuators, which don't, as Brett said, just like Elon has said before, and Milan and those guys, that you're looking at these things just don't exist on the market right now. But once they realize there's a market, and Brett said this, he said, a billion robots is not out of the question. Um, that's a pretty big market for somebody to build actuators. So,
It's
somebody
also a
should be
lot of
thinking about it.
batteries.
Yes,
So,
and batteries,
and you
batteries.
know the
Yeah,
robot manufacturers are not going to be buying their own batteries. As a matter of fact, the traditional industrial robot manufacturers, they buy their actuators from outside.
right,
They're not
right.
necessarily building them themselves.
Yes.
So,
Yeah,
they're looking at the best suppliers of gearboxes and everything else. So in the end, they just become sort of integrators of all the parts, and they do
right,
their own casting and a few things like that. So
right.
there is already precedence for something like that. And I agree. After a while, um, you're going to see people specking it out because, again, it's kind of a first principles thing. Is if you're going through and
Right.
you're trying to design a humanoid body and you're trying to come up with different shoulders and elbows, everyone's probably going to come in the kind of the same ballpark. And what size
Yeah,
actuator do you need
yeah,
for the elbow? Do you need for the
yeah,
knee? Do you need for the hip? So, unless people are going for a completely different design space or completely different specifications, you're probably going to find that they're going to coalesce around some very common designs.
right. And I think that's ultimately what that's going to do is reduce the cost of these bots because
Mhm.
if you have one or a few companies manufacturing millions of these particular actuators every year, they can do it a lot cheaper than a company that's making 50,000 or 100,000 of them a year.
Yeah.
And that actually, it was a very exciting thing for me because I was like, oh, this will democratize these humanoid robots too. Because right now, you got Figure, which is a relatively small company. You've also got Tesla, which is a very big company. Both of them have publicly said couldn't find actuators, building them ourselves. Uh, but you don't want four or five proprietary companies only making it for themselves and not sharing it. For the widespreadness of the humanoid bot, I think it's all to the good because the actuators really are the sticking point and the brain, obviously.
And the
Um,
brain, and in the end, the hand. So if you look at the traditional
right.
robot companies, they build the robots without any end of arm tooling.
Yes.
And then there are
Yes.
these other suppliers that come out here that develop the end of arm tooling that works in any of the different bots, and they have standard interfaces and everything like that. And
Right.
Brett already mentioned that they're coming up with sort of an interface
Evan.
for their hand to allow
Yeah.
them to like switch it out and put something else in. So you can
Yes.
imagine eventually there might be some sort of standard fitting that you would have for a robotic hand. And then you
Right.
just go to whoever supplier that you need that has a hand that you like for your particular application. So
Right.
you may have hands that are going to be more industrial, fewer degrees of freedom, and they may
Right.
have hands that have way more degrees of freedom because you're trying to do something that's far more precise.
Yeah. It was interesting that he said that pinky, if he had to give up one thing, it would be the pinky. Sorry, I'll try to freeze frame it on the hand there so
That
people don't forget.
and that was like an interesting response. I guess that's why I asked the
Yeah.
question. Is I already
Yeah.
had in my own head what I expected the answers to be, and it's
Well,
sort of
what
nice
was
when
the
the
what was
answer
yeah,
is
because you were
different.
clearly surprised. What was it that you expected?
Well, I wasn't sure if you would take like a degree of freedom out of the neck, or if you were thinking of
Mhm.
like, was there
Mhm.
something in the shoulder or the hip? Um, And also was interesting that he didn't want to put anything back in. I was like, "Oh, you can put one more back in. You can put
Right.
one more back
Right.
in." And it's like, nope. So, I mean, you could almost imagine it's like, well, maybe that torso rotation or something like that. Maybe we don't necessarily need that. Or,
Right.
in the end, do we even need any of the neck? So it was interesting to say that, yeah, it was the pinky. Because I was thinking more
Yeah.
structural actuators. I wasn't even thinking of the hand. I figured, oh, the hand's
Mhm.
the hand. So it
Yeah.
was it was interesting to see that, and I will continue to ask that question of anyone that's a CEO of these bot companies, just to see what the response is for that reason.
Right. Oh, good. Now you got it. I didn't know you were backstage watching because that was great because you were able to write down some really, really good questions from him. But anyway, you can see the hand. And I thought it was a very good question that you asked why they had chosen three joints. Interestingly, watching his response, it was, yes, we're designing the next generation hand. You'll see it in a couple of months. So my guess, if I had to make a guess, is that we're going to see a two jointed hand fingers in the
Maybe
next generation.
or maybe 4 or something like that, because he said there's like a
Oh,
lot of back and forth, and
yeah.
I
Yeah.
and I could see the advantages of having 3, but many of
Right.
the other bot manufacturers decided to also go with 2.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
the main reason to if you don't need that third one, I mean, if there's a compelling reason that you need to have the 3 knuckles to be able to do the kinds of grasping operations, you've really convinced yourself, you've gone in there and done the analysis and say 3 really does it. I mean, it covers all these things. You got to have 3. But if it doesn't come
Right.
back and says like, "No, you can really do it with 2," then you're going to
Right.
say, "Well, then let's drop it," because,
Mhm.
the best part is no part. You
Yeah.
have fewer
Yeah.
points of failure. It's a lot easier to assemble. There could be a variety of reasons. So, i- and the other thing I thought was really interesting is that they've taken sensors out. They weren't sure about the sensors, and they find out that
Right.
putting the
Right.
sensors in the hands, whereas Tesla bot went the other way. And James and
Right.
I had been kind of arguing all along. He's like, "Yeah, probably don't need the sensors." And so I was a bit
Right.
surprised when Optimus put it back in there. And so when I heard he said that, it seems like you really don't need it. It kind of
Yeah.
was almost heartening for me because I felt there have been other ways. There's enough information in that noise. There's enough signal in what seemed like the noise coming back that if you
Right.
train it enough, you probably don't need it. And I think that the case is that our eyes are so good with our perception system, you really don't
Right.
need a sense of touch to do almost
And you
anything you
can
want.
see your hand as it's moving, so kind of
A,
have a sense of
a
that. Yeah.
sense of touch is kind of nice to have. Um,
Right.
but I mean, we already get the feedback from our muscles when we grab something and it's like, oh, it won't move
Right.
anymore. So that's kind of the feedback that you have for your sensors.
Right.
But the touch, it's really only nice when your hands are out of your field of view. So again, the idea you're reaching
Mhm.
behind your laptop trying to plug something in, then suddenly you kind of turn that thing on because it kind of
Yep.
replaces the eyes that you don't have. But once your
Right.
eyes are there, you can almost do it. And an experiment of that is if you've ever been really numbed, that you can't feel
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
like your
Like
hands are
today,
completely
it's
frozen,
freaking freezing here.
freezing. You can't feel anything on there. Yet when you look at it, you can still manipulate things pretty well.
Right.
So I can believe that you don't necessarily need it. Um,
Right.
and what kind of sensors they have, he didn't really kind of say, but he feels like, yeah, you don't need to touch sensors. And it's like, oh,
Well, and
okay. So
he said that they're looking at getting rid of several of the sensors they have
mhm,
because they
mhm,
haven't
mhm.
even used them. So,
Yes,
maybe they have
sounds
some sensors,
familiar.
but yeah.
The
He
radar, sensor
specifically said
fusion,
the
stuff like
reason
that.
why I
Maybe
thought
that's
of
the
that.
whole thing.
Yeah. he said, we did the coffee demonstration without sensors on the fingers, but what that indicates to me is maybe they had them, but they had them turned off and it worked fine.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
maybe it's that they decided they didn't need. So,
Mhm. I agree
and
because I really think the eyes, it's a good perception system with a really good neural net,
right.
and you almost don't need it.
Right. Which is the reason why the question is why did Tesla add it? Because they are just like always like no, no, no extra parts. And so, they cut
You know
things and
what?
people are like, you're crazy for
I
cutting them.
think I might know why.
Okay.
Because of the telerobotic control. It's really hard to teleoperate if you can't feel what's going on.
Mm, okay.
They needed some sense of
So,
feedback.
okay.
Now, if you get those haptic gloves that you were talking about,
Right.
where the tendons would go on there, so you would, let's say, actually feel what
Right.
Optimus is feeling when it goes to grab something, that might be something else. But it may
Right.
have been it was too difficult telerobotically to be able to tell whether you actually were touching something correctly. They needed something like that, perhaps.
Right.
I
Right.
don't know. But then again, I could be wrong. Is you should be able to get the kind of the haptic feedback, or let's say the buzzing feel,
Right.
just from the fact that suddenly the current is spiking a little bit as the torque goes up as you clasp something. So
Right. So
that's
so
one
here you
guess.
can see this is Sense Glove, so I figured why not bring it up while we're doing it. But you can
Hmm.
see that there's a little pack and there's little tendon thingies on the back of the hand. So that actually is really interesting that could provide some feedback to the teleoperator.
Hmm.
It seems like but again, Elon is we have different use cases, and Elon was like, I wanted to be able to thread a needle. And that's a place where I could imagine touch being really important because you really need to be able to dexterously figure out where everything is and how it's. I don't know. It feels like for an application like that, having some sort of fine
I
grained
don't know.
degree
I
of
mean,
touch.
to me, threading a needle has nothing to do with touch. It has everything to do with a good magnifying glass.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really a
Or when
vision
you're
problem.
young, just
And
your
so
eyes.
you're sitting there just kind of doing that, trying to get it through, and you're not
Right.
really getting any feedback except from your eyes. It's like, is it going through?
Right.
Is it not? So
Yeah. But it's sort of more on the order of the nature of holding the object, and then you kind of like want to twist the thread so it's very very thin at the front like a little
mhm.
spear. um so I don't know.
Oh, and
it,
Optimus doesn't have a mouth, so that's even going to be more difficult because that's
yeah,
the first thing
exactly,
you
you can't
do with
wet
a
the
thread
thing.
is you
Yeah,
put a little bit of
exactly.
saliva on there, spin it around, and then
Man, oh, Optimus has a significant disadvantage in that case. They're gonna have to wet its fingertips so it can like pull the thread. Yeah, I mean, geez, that's complicated. By the way, Tesla and Figure Robotics, I have got a test for you. So today, and I was gonna film it, but I realized both of my hands were full at the time. And also for Aloha, mobile Aloha, take one bottle, like a small bottle, and the oil, it was oil, and with a small mouth, and take, the big jug of oil, like the olive oil, and pour the big jug into the small jug without a funnel. Try it with a funnel first, but then without a funnel and don't spill it. That I think would be a pretty good test for dual hand robotics. Like that's complicated. And you've got
and
different
vision.
things like the
Mhm.
weight changes over time because you're filling it up with oil. So there's interesting things that happen with that. So anyway, that's my
Yeah.
suggestion for a test. And so anybody who wants to take that on, if somebody wants to send a video of it working, I'll be like, nice.
Mhm.
So, or maybe they can show it to us in person, right, Scott? We're willing
Yes,
to go
absolutely.
anywhere, anytime. We will come.
Anywhere,
We'll come.
anytime. Yes.
Yeah.
So what other big takeaways did you get from it?
So yeah, let me see. So it was that the idea of somebody building actuators would be good, and the multidisciplinary approach. But then the other thing I started to think about, and I feel like this is blasphemy, but I was like, man, did Tesla make a really big mistake trying to do full self-driving first? I was actually, because Brian, my Tesla weekend, he was posted something and I responded to it and I said, basically like autopilot, whatever you want to call it, autonomous driving is like the PhD of AI. And you're a very long way towards AGI at the point when you can do that. And the robots, humanoid robots, because of the fact that there's not the safety concerns, they're moving much, much slower. They can sort of crash and think about things for a couple of seconds and it's no big deal. Like it's so much, the fruit is so much more low hanging than it is in a car. A car is very complicated and because of the safety criticality of it. So it's very interesting. They had this first mover thing where they were clearly way ahead of the game, but at the same time, in the mid 2000 teens, you had a lot of companies that were working on this and were very ambitious and said, oh yeah, we're going to solve this in a couple of years. So it wasn't just Elon saying this, it was a bunch of people. And now one by one, they're dropping like flies. And there's not too much competition left because people have realized how freaking hard it is. And it's mostly because of the safety issues. You got a 3,000, 4,000 pound death machine that's going at 70 miles an hour or something, whatever. This is incredibly dangerous. And a bot simply isn't in that category, especially in a factory circumstance where it can be isolated. You can put it in a cage for a while if you want to. You can separate it out from humans in those situations. So I don't know. What are your thoughts about that? And like I said, I feel like it's like blasphemy. And I still think Tesla's positioned to get there first, but I think that I have changed my mind. I guess this is it. I believe they're actually going to have Optimus doing useful work. In fact, it probably already is in their factories way before they're going to get to autonomous taxi rides. Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
So you agree with me?
that was going to be my answer. My answer
Yeah.
is I think the bot within the factory comes before robotaxi.
Okay.
So it
Right.
in a sense, I've always sort of stated that the bot will affect the bottom line of Tesla more and sooner than robotaxi. So it
Yeah.
doesn't mean the bot's going to be generating revenue. What it means, it's going to be doing useful work, which is
Right.
in a sense helping to increase profits before robotaxi does that.
Right.
FSD, we can argue, is already maybe sort of making money for the company, maybe not,
Well, I mean,
because they're still spending a lot
yeah, I
on
mean,
the
they're
R&D.
spending a lot,
They're
but
spending a
yeah,
lot. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So my feeling is that yes, the bot will do that. I think my other big takeaway, because I know we don't cover that much on this channel. We're more kind of looking at technical aspects of how things work. But
right,
the big part about the bot is the economics around it and the total addressable market and how much money you can potentially make. And as you know, CERN and I have been sort of working on these models. I sort of dabbled around looking at the impact that the bot was going to have to manufacturing within Tesla. The idea of driving the margins down, but not so much looking at what is the actual addressable market outside. And so that's something that CERN has been very good at, being able to take create these models to say like what is the economic potential of a humanoid bot.
right.
But we didn't really have, let's say, any good reference data to be able to tell how serious everyone was taking it. So I kind of alluded to the video before this that before the BMW announcement, there was a stigma attached to the idea of companies announcing that they're working
Right.
with humanoid bots. No one was taking it seriously. And CERN expressed some concern a few weeks ago about, it's like, are the CEOs of these companies, are they looking at the bot? Are they looking at that
Right.
problem? Because we know they have labor problems. And if they're not, they're making a big mistake.
Right.
And so as we see, the first thing, and this is like the notes that I was doing furiously when Herbert was interviewing Brett,
Right.
is he talked about that they've talked to 50 of the top 100 Fortune 500 companies.
Yeah.
It seems like
That's
it's more or
crazy.
less like rather than reaching out to them, they're coming to them.
Yeah.
That they
Right.
they chose BMW over all the other motive
Right.
companies. All those companies want to work with them. So
Right.
we now know that they are all talking. They're all thinking about it. They're
Yeah.
just being very quiet. They're not letting anyone know, but they are taking the humanoid bot seriously. The other thing we know is that, beginning of last week, we could see that everyone that was doing an evaluation model for Tesla was ignoring the bot.
Hmm.
So Adam Jonas was like, he even had like Dojo as a service as
Right.
potentially being a revenue and robotaxi and everything, but the bot wasn't in the model.
Right.
ARK Invest hasn't really looked at it as part of their evaluation model. Gary Black has more or less discounted it completely. You're kind
Right.
of going on, and everyone on Wall Street is like, and I think it's because of the stigma that was attached to it.
Right.
Now I think they're all going to be rethinking their models, but not just for Tesla. I mean, they're probably looking at
Yeah.
in general
Right.
which companies are thinking of using bots and which ones not. Which ones do they think are going to be able to get the dance partners they're going to need? Because right now there are not enough humanoid robot companies out there. Brett says
Right.
that they're only going to work with two.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There's
That was
there's
interesting that
yeah,
he was
and
like,
and
we've
only
had
one automotive.
Right. He was like, "We've had many people approach us, but we're done. We're not taking on new clients at this point, so we can focus on the ones we have." So,
Right,
yeah,
right.
that was pretty impressive, that,
And that was the part that I couldn't really talk to that I was about that I wanted to. It's like, wow, the
yeah.
market has just changed. It's more than just the
Well, this is
BMW
good to
announcement. It's
know,
the
though, because
background to the announcement.
yeah. And specifically what he said in the interview was he said, "They're
Mhm,
just like, we can't find workers." He said something like a 50 to 150% attrition rate for
mhm.
some jobs in factories every year.
Absolutely,
If
absolutely.
you have to turn over more than 100% of your workers in a year, that is a terrible sign. I mean, it's a bad
And
job. Nobody wants
he's
it.
not making that up because
Yeah.
I've heard that from many other sources.
Right.
CERN's
Right.
sort of I've witnessed it personally,
Yeah.
myself, even before COVID and stuff like that, working
Right.
in these companies and going in there and them talking about that problem and having like 50% turnover in 6 months.
Right.
And, just a lot of issues like that, yeah, there is, ironically, there's a labor shortage. I mean, everyone is afraid
Right.
it's going to take away jobs, but it's not going to
Yeah.
really take away jobs. It's taking away jobs people don't want to do that they cannot
Right.
keep filled.
Right. Yeah, and then on top of that, the cherry on top of it is if these things become commoditized enough and they're inexpensive enough, which goes back to the actuator factory, and actually I could even see a company creating just a bulk humanoid bot and you plug your own brain or whatever kind of specialty item you want to put on, right? So they could just crank these things out. And maybe Tesla will do that someday. I don't know. Maybe Figure will do that someday. Um, Okay, a couple things I want to touch on. Number one is the mass manufacturing thing, and number two is BMW specifically. So number one, mass manufacturing. This is where Tesla currently has a massive leg up on any company, including Figure. And he talked about that. He's like, we're trying to figure out how to make this mass manufacturable, but once they have this thing, then they either have to go to a partner or build a factory and make this all happen themselves. Whereas Tesla, if they can figure this out, they can scale very quickly because they have a factory
Right,
already and they can
right,
plop
right,
it right
right.
down in there and put a line to build a humanoid bot is not going to take any space at all. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, so
Yeah.
they have a massive advantage in scalability. And again, that's no knock on Figure at all. I mean, they're a tiny company. They just started less than 2 years ago. Um, but it is an interesting thing if people are suddenly like, oh no, Tesla's going to lose. It's like, no, they're not. And Figure's not going to lose either because they've got these massive partners. And as long he was saying that, he's like DEFCON, whatever, we've got to not fail at whatever this first job is that the bot is doing. And we've got to prove that it works, but they will have deep pockets helping them. And BMW, I
Yeah.
mean, holy crap, they can manufacture a bot factory too. So, they can do this
Potentially,
stuff.
but potentially.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of look at that long term. And I think,
Right.
the first sign of maturity of a company is when they know when to say no.
Yes.
When you're a
Yes.
startup, you're saying yes to everyone.
Yes, exactly.
But
Believe me, I'm in that
but
situation right now.
right. But when you get to the point that you can start saying no to customers, no to applications and stuff like that, that means you really are getting your focus.
Right.
The other thing is like, yeah, there is a difference between design for manufacture and actually being able to manufacture. It
Yep.
seems to me they do have like a design for manufacture mentality, even if they haven't done it in practice, the
Mhm.
manufacturing
Mhm.
aspect of it.
Mhm.
They are thinking about that. They are thinking of what the
Right.
costs are, how hard it's going to be. They
Yeah.
are building it in house, so they get sort of an idea.
Well,
They may
and
not quite
I
understand.
at least 3 times and
Mhm.
maybe more, he said
Yeah,
BOM or bill of materials. So, always in his
yeah,
brain, it's how much does it cost? It's
yes.
not really, really different from Boston Dynamics, which was always like, "Look at this cool thing we built," but it's like, "Well, how much did it cost and how long did it take?" And it's like, don't worry about that." So,
But
um,
they're
yeah.
thinking about that, and right now they again it comes down to kind of the algorithm, the optimization coming at the end. In some ways, you've got to get the prototype. Yes, production is hard, but without a prototype, there's no need for production. So don't build
Yep.
your plant before you have the
No.
prototype.
No. Exactly.
You can kind of, it's not something you would take for granted, but you can accept the fact that this can be done. The problem with manufacturing is that's when your capex goes way up.
Right.
And right now, they only have like what 70 million in capital, which will barely get you through 1 year when you
Right.
already have a workforce of about 70 individuals.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
there's going to have to be a new capital raise. And the question is whether they're able to bring in other partners and stuff like that that would help them, that would have the expertise
Right.
to be able to build a factory. But the scale of the factory you need to build is not going to be like an automotive factory where you
Right.
need billions and billions of dollars to be able to set that up. So, but still, they're going to need more. They need almost like
Yeah.
probably a factor of 10 what they have when they get ready to scale.
Right.
But if they're already getting revenue and they're already seeing promise, they won't have any problem getting that. I mean, snap their
Right.
fingers once they do it, and then it comes. The
Yeah.
biggest thing about it, 70 million for a startup in Silicon Valley. That's peanuts.
I
That's
know. It
nothing.
is. Yeah.
So,
Well,
um,
but also look what they've this is a hardware startup, and they've created an amazing amount on that amount of money. That's
they're
impressive.
capital efficient. They are definitely
Yeah.
capital efficient
Yeah.
that they've done that. Yeah,
Right. And
absolutely.
and I will go out on a limb here and say that probably part of the reason they picked BMW, not just because of the culture and everything like that, but probably BMW was like, "Look, you prove this out to us, and we will help you build this thing,
Mhm.
or at least provide capital to do it," or something like that,
Yes. Oh,
To
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah,
They would probably look at it and say, "Yeah,
right,
we'll look at it. We can tell you exactly what's going on." Because again, there's some sort of synergies in there. Is that
right,
And I'm not sure whether BMW is making their own actuators and drives now for their electric vehicles, or
right,
some of the stuff I know they're getting from Bosch, the smaller actuators and things like that, and stuff from
right.
Siemens. But maybe that eventually they're saying, "Hey, wait a minute, we're an automotive manufacturer. We're supposed to
Yep.
build our own motors. We're BMW. Remember the M in BMW is
Bavarian
motor,
Motorwerk, yeah. Yeah,
Metavec. Okay,
yeah,
so this whole idea that they don't actually make the motors, it's like no,
right,
they're going to get into that, and that's again,
right,
it's going to be an aspect of it.
yeah,
So I would think that, yeah, that's a possible
right.
partnership. Plus, you
And
do
they
get the
might be
insight of what
looking at
manufacturing is like.
right. I don't does BMW so they don't manufacture their own motors right now, their own electric motors?
I don't
Is
know.
that
See, that's the thing
oh,
I don't
okay.
know.
Well, I
I
was
think
thinking
like,
that certainly that's another piece of IP that figure has that they would love is the fact that the actuators and motors are not that different. I mean, there's a lot of
mhm,
similarities between those two things, and so I could see BMW going, like, "Oh, yeah, we're really interested in the chemicals the chemistry you're using to make these things, and the
mhm,
way that you're building
yeah,
the actuators."
yeah,
So I could
yeah.
see that.
Now,
Yeah,
remember at first, there was a relationship between Mercedes and Tesla, where Tesla was supplying actuators to
yes,
Mercedes at one point for some of their
yes,
early
yes,
EV test vehicles.
yes,
And of course, uh, a lot of automotive suppliers are supplying a lot of stuff like, I'm sure like the windshield wipers, the motors, and stuff like that's coming from some supplier. And for
right,
your door openers and window mechanisms, stuff like that, you're going to have
right,
lots of these suppliers that produce those actuators. And so you're not worrying about it. But when you're really
right,
thinking about it, it's like the drivetrain. I mean, that's the whole idea of being an automotive
yeah,
company is it's all about the drive. You're not going to outsource much of that. You're going to try to
right,
bring that in. So I'm sure they're learning to do that and are going to be developing that.
yeah. And I'll go back and just so speaking of BMW and why would they have picked them versus GM or Toyota or whoever? A couple of things. Number one, BMW and Mercedes are two companies that are at the forefront in terms of selling percentage of their vehicles that are EVs are pretty high now. Not
Hmm.
that that necessarily has to do with humanoid robots, but there's a lot of overlap again. Batteries, actuators, motors, all of that kind of stuff. Uh, the brains inside the vehicles but also, again, I'll go back to and by the way, Brett keeps saying Spartansburg. It's Spartanburg, Brett. Just a little small correction. But anyway, I live less than 2 hours away from there, and if BMW or Figure would let me come, I will be happy to go visit and take a look. But as I said in our previous talk, that the BMW iCar that plant in Greenville Spartanburg is in association with Clemson University, there's a whole separate unit that's a research unit that's attached to the factory where they manufacture the cars. So this is the ideal place. I can't, if it weren't for Tesla, I would be like, yeah, I know it's a German company and they have a reputation for being very staid and you know, put on the business suit and have 15 committee meetings before you do anything. But this is specifically a research arm and it is associated with the university and it is populated with a lot of American researchers and everything. So it feels like a pretty good match. I think, if you're going to pick a company out and culturally, I know BMW might not be the one that people would think of at first, but I think this particular factory and everything, it seems like a very good match for Figure.
Yeah, I think so. And again, when it comes to manufacturing, German companies have incredible expertise,
Yep.
because of the precision of
Yep.
what they do.
Yep.
They build a lot of the automation themselves. They know how to work with the different suppliers. So, to me, that seems like a good match. And
Yeah.
again, I think what it came down to is that they had every automotive company talk to them. Now, how many of them were like more recent discussions that you
Right.
could say, well, you're a bit late versus others that were out there? Um,
Right.
they were making sure that they were trying to find the right partner that had the right fit. in many
Right.
cases, within our own company, you end up getting that customer that you actually want to wish on your arch rival because they're so difficult to work with. And then
Right.
there are the others that are absolute joy that,
Yeah.
they are very knowledgeable, they're tolerant to what you're trying to do. They're helping you along, and they're probably seeing that. And sometimes you may look at an automotive company that's coming around looking at it, and are they just tire kickers? It's like they're
Yep.
not really serious, or they may be kind of serious, but they just seem so clueless and so lost. It might be just like that's just not the right fit. And
Right.
you can kind of tell that suddenly it's like everything clicks together. You begin to realize they have the expertise, they've got the motivation, they're eager, they want to do. They probably
Right.
came in and laid out a plan. They've been talking about this for 6 months.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
wasn't something that, somewhere in December, someone saw the Gen 2 demo of Optimus and suddenly go, oh crap, we got to do something, and started like going through the yellow pages, oh,
Right.
humanoid robot companies, and start calling up and say, yeah, we want to do a deal right now. It's like, you're a bit late, it's like, it's
Right.
possible something
Right.
like that happened.
Yeah.
So I think it's gone from, there may have been initially a little bit of outreach from Figure to try to find the partner. So probably it just turned around that it's like,
Yeah.
oh, put that guy on hold and
Yeah.
tell him I'll call him back later.
And this is where you go from what you were saying. It's a really good position for Figure to be in to turn people down, because you're
Hmm.
going from yes, please, thank you, oh, God bless you for making this agreement. In which case, you go with any old company, and it might not be the best fit. But here, it sounds like they were in the driver's the driver's seat. They were in
Yeah.
the, they were directing this, and they had many suitors, and they picked the one that they thought was best, which is a really ideal situation.
Hmm.
And it is, this kind of a thing is really important. It's maybe not a marriage, but certainly dating for a long time. You're going to be together
Yes.
for a lot of years.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so you want it to fit well.
Yeah. And I
Right.
think the other impression I had is I know right when the BMW announcement came out, there's a lot of people that kind of pushed back and just said, it's just a PR stunt.
Right.
And
Mm,
yeah, I could see why, because we've all been jaded. We've all seen a lot of those.
right.
But after this interview, I'm more convinced it's not really a PR stunt.
No.
That there really is something going on there, and that you need to take it a bit more serious. Of course, time will tell, whether
Right.
it really is. But I think just you can't just write it off as something like that. And again, I feel that the stigma of using the humanoid bot, especially with the next company that comes along,
Right.
which is not going to be automotive related,
Yes.
and they come in, and who that announcement is, that's going to be very interesting to
Right.
see what space it is. The other thing I have to do is go through the list of Fortune 500 companies and start kind of figuring out which ones would be interesting, because he said he spoke to 50 of the top 100 Fortune 500
Right.
companies.
Right. It's just
And
like, which ones
and
are they?
so you could kind of go through and say, okay, who could those be? Some of them that are up there would probably make sense, or you don't have to include them.
Yeah.
Financial services companies, banks that
Well,
might be up
or even
there.
a company like Apple or something, maybe not, because Apple might be doing their own
Yeah,
work.
maybe not. Yeah, yeah. So potentially. So I think you
Right.
can winnow that list down a little bit to say, oh, these are the ones
Right.
they're talking about, which
Right.
means these, and because they've had this dialogue, they're all thinking about it. So it
Yep.
may be seeing that there's people that are mercantile, maybe like Walmart or Target or something like that. You're saying, aha,
Mhm.
retailers that are thinking into it. Maybe people
Right.
that are doing assembly. It could be, maybe there's like a pharmaceutical company in there, or others, or
Right.
we'll just have to go down that whole list. You know, it's not going to be an insurance company, because I don't see how a robot would work in an insurance company, but you never know.
Exactly. But yeah, it is also, it's gotta be a pretty heady thing for, I mean, I know he started up, what is it, 2 or 3 other companies, but still, it's gotta be pretty heady
Mhm,
to be going and talking to CEOs of half the Fortune 100 companies in a year. That's an
mhm,
impressive achievement. So, yeah.
absolutely.
Um, yeah. But yeah, it is really interesting because it's like automotive makes sense and people know that, but there's a lot of other things that are built in factories, and they need work. I think they're going to probably focus on that. And I think in
Yeah.
terms of, like, to go back to the whole PR stunt thing, listening to him talk, he was like, look, we are a milestone based. If we don't hit it, we're fired. We're out the door. It was very clear that they know. So that doesn't sound like a PR stunt at all, at least from Figure's point of view. They're looking at this as deadly serious, that they have to do this. And who knows what. So their valuation is 70 million, or that's how much cash they have on
No,
hand?
no, that's how much cash they have. I think their valuation is like 450 million after that
Okay.
capital
But
raise. But
but I
still,
have to
that's
think
like
after
teeny
this
tiny.
announcement, this has got to bump that. It's got
Oh,
to
it's going to
double.
change. It's going to
Yeah.
change. Now, the other thing about it is they're not listed. They're not doing a SPAC.
Right.
So, we don't know if they need another capital raise right now.
Right.
But if it was one of those things to try to pump up your stock, there's no stock to pump up.
Right. Right. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
it may be that you want to get a lot of venture capitalists and others interested, but they're going to do extreme due diligence on you. They're going to
Yeah.
look at this
Yeah.
and again, BMW, they they don't want to tarnish their name. You don't
No.
do something like this to them. I mean,
As opposed to some other companies that don't seem to care. In the
yeah, yeah.
automotive space specifically.
In the automotive space, we can name them. I mean, the Mary Barra's stunt with Nikola, that just blew up in their face. And
Right.
so there's a
And
reason you vet
Lordstown.
these
Let's
things.
not
There's
forget
a reason,
Lordstown also.
and
Yeah. So
Lordstown. There's a reason you do due diligence on these things.
yeah.
So they've done their due diligence, and
Yep.
any venture capital that's coming in with a lot of money, they're not going to. Well, but then again, FTX kind of tells us that a guy could be playing a video
Right.
game and,
Right.
and convince them to drop a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that they will be more serious. They're going to want to go out. They're going to test the hardware. They're going to look at it. If you're thinking of investing a couple $100 million,
Right.
yeah, there's going to be due diligence.
Yeah. And
So
again,
from that
this is one
standpoint,
of
I
those
don't think
things.
it's a stock pump.
This is one of those things where I feel like the fact that it's a German company also gives it some cred, because these are not, they're careful people.
Hmm. Hmm.
You're in
Hmm.
Germany right now. It's a nation of relatively conservative people who are careful about this kind of stuff. And so they're not just willy-nilly going to throw a bunch of money at something they don't believe will work. So they know what they're doing.
Oh yeah,
And yeah. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely, and you really have to prove it to them before they will move ahead. So
Right.
yeah, they've got a lot of benchmarks they have to go through. The overall game plan they come up with is something that I see as making sense. That
Yeah.
how they're going ahead and do it. That the fact they've already winnowed it down to 5 particular
Right.
areas or
Oh,
tasks
no,
that they
he
want
said
to
they've
do.
identified one they're already working on. He said they're building
Yeah.
those 3D models and then
Hmm.
recreating the space in their headquarters. So yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
um,
it's they're definitely moving ahead. So and I believe they can achieve it. And again, they admitted that the first thing is to demonstrate that the humanoid bot can do it, even if it's not as fast as a human.
right.
It doesn't matter if it's as fast as a human
Right.
if
Right.
it can't do the task. So the most
Yeah.
important thing is do the task, and then when you get that, you can think of, okay, what do we need to do to make it faster? You'll get the
Right.
feedback. You'll be able to find, okay, it's because we don't have enough torque in some of our actuators,
Yeah.
because torque
Yeah.
equals acceleration, which is going to make things a little bit faster, or there's some other things that are going on that you haven't quite designed right, and that's going to change.
Yeah.
And the bot that you see now, it's figure one, and we kind of joke that the one they're going to release is going to be called figure eight. So they're going to go through a
Right.
lot of different iterations
Yeah.
to get
Exactly.
up there, and you got to
Maybe
start
that'll be
somewhere.
the consumer version.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Probably.
yeah. All right. Well, I know you've got to talk to Randy, and it's also quite late at night there, so I'm going to let you go. But thank you so much for talking about all of this stuff. Wow.
Hmm.
I mean, like 2024 year of embodied AI. This is definitely what's going to happen this year. And Brett was pretty adamant about 12 to 24 months of seeing them, maybe in a McDonald's, maybe if you go to tour a factory or something, you will actually see these bots out there. And that is pretty exciting. I love his line. Maybe we can finish on that he's like, in 2 years, it's going to feel like we're 50 years in the future. Like it's just going to be this big jump in the way that we think about the world and ourselves. And that's pretty cool. So, all
I
right. Well,
agree.
thank you once again, Scott, for joining us from Germany. I know you're coming home relatively soon, so that'll be nice to have you back on the same time zone. But in the meantime, really appreciate it. Thanks and have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye now.